Welcome back, everybody. I'd like to introduce Dr. Ray Coppinger. He is up next, and he is a professor emeritus of biology at Hampshire College. He lectures around the world and coordinates animal behavior research, especially on, as you guessed it, the behavior of canines. Ray's first professional studies of dogs were with sled dogs, and during a 12-year mushing career, he won many races on the Northeast circuits. His co-authored book, Dogs, A Startling New Understanding of Canine Origin, Behavior, and Evolution, has been translated into 7 languages. He and his collaborators have published widely about dog research, but his favorite publication is his recently re-released book, Fishing Dogs, a humorous look at dogs, fishermen, and professors. Today, he's here to present Aggression, Not a Unitary Behavior. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Ray Coppinger.
We're supposed to talk about the differences in dog breeds. And it's, believe it or not, there are all kinds of articles out there on the differences of dog breeds, and they want to do temperament, they want to do whatever. But you'll realize that I'm not that kind of a guy. I'm down somewhere else. First of all, I think that, trying to find breed differences in their pet class dogs. Dogs that are bred for the show ring are bred for the way they look. What kind of dog is that? It's a Manchester, I think. And so they're bred for the show ring, and they're bred for some particular conformation. And the conformation is just because it's an unusual conformation, and so you can be a member of the Manchester Terrier Club, and you have a dog that's descended from the grand champion who was judged not on his behavior, but his ability to stand still and look for a Manchester. So then you take that dog home, you go to breeder, and they say, oh, we've got really, really good Manchester Terriers. And how do you know that? Well, we have a long list of champions out there, and the champions are all judged on the way they look. And the way they stand. And basically, when you get the pet home, it's not supposed to do anything. And if it does anything, then you take it to some animal trainer to try to train him out of it. All right, so the fact is that you don't want the dog chasing cars. You don't want the dog. We saw that brilliant talk yesterday by my friend James that talks about, there's a spread in there and some Manchester Terriers are going to bite people, and we don't want that. You have to figure out how to breed that out of them or whatever, while still maintaining the conformation of the dog. All right, so I don't know anything about these dogs. Zero. And not to be insulting, but I find them uninteresting because they're not supposed to do anything. Now, all right, so there are places, I was always interested in the working dogs, and there are places in the world where you do want a physical standard on your working dog. And one of those places, I did this to represent all the different shapes and color patterns and everything of dogs. But I couldn't get them all in one picture, so I used herringull eggs. And as you see, the herringull eggs, go from something over there almost pure white, and all the way down here to something that's very brown and very checkered, has a pattern to it. And then there's everything in between. Some of them actually were blue before the slide faded, but the bluish. And the interesting part of that story is that that represents, the entire spectrum, the variation that you have in herringull eggs. But it doesn't tell you anything about the frequency. All right, so actually, if you go into a herringull colony, you find out that the vast majority of eggs look like that one down there. all right? And I use that as an illustration for you. When you're looking at breeds of dogs, you say, first of all, in the vocabulary it goes, dogs do this, or dogs don't do that, or whatever. And you're using dogs as a generic type, and they're not. There's tremendous variation in them in a lot of ways, and I want to talk something about that variation. All right, and in that variation, what James tried to do yesterday was talk about, the variation you have in aggressive behavior. And so there's so many percentage of the dogs that don't bite people, and there's a few that do bite people, and so you try to track out what is the frequency of the behavior you're looking at. Now, you're doing that for economic reasons, really, rather than somebody who's in working dogs that is doing it for the reasons of performance. So here's a sled dog team. And immediately what you note when you look at them is that they're all the same size. All right, size is really an important aspect of racing sled dogs. And I could, if I had the time, we could go into the physics of why those dogs all have to be the same size. All right, with the ear carriage or the color or eye color or whatever else it is doesn't make any difference, but the shape of that dog is critical to winning a dog race. Now, I like this model because life is like a dog race. There are very few winners. All right. Yesterday, when we were talking about natural selection, we went up there and we said, look, most wolves are going to starve to death. It's only the few that are the right shape and the right temperament or whatever else that are going to survive and pass their genes on to the next generation. And it's going to be really small percentage of the population. All right, so we go out there, and some of my friends say, the dog is the most varied animal in the world. Well, that's wrong. It isn't. Is what all this variation is mutations that appear in any other animal population in the world. All right, the trouble is that when a wolf has the mutation for chondroplasia, which is the short legs, all right, there's this guy down here. When wolves have that, they die almost immediately. They're gone. All right, it's just the fact is that there's money and there's pride, reputation, or something in having some kinds of freaks out there. No, it's serious. It teased me off that you could develop a dog out there, a breeder dog, that for most of them spend their whole life suffering from low... I guess I hit a chord. All right, so I won't go into it, but when they talk to me about doing breed differences, and then they say, okay, well, are there breed differences in behaviors of this kind of animal? And the answer is, of course there's breed differences in behavior. And Simon said it yesterday. What's the definition of behavior? Remember he said yesterday the definition of behavior is some form, some shape moving through time and space. All right, so and I did it, I waved my hand at you and I said, look, my hand probably never occupied that space in that shape ever before in the history of the world. All right, it's an actual original behavior. But you're never fooled, all right? It's always a hand. All right, so when you watch a dog go through time and space, you watch some breed of dog go through time and space, you realize that the Dachshund can't go through time and space the same way the Borzoi can. Or is that an Afghan? Sorry. I just wanted to see if you were awake. All right, so I usually, in lots of the things I write and so on, compare the Dachshund with a Greyhound. Do they move through time and space the same way? Of course not. All right. So the fact is that dogs behave like dogs, because they look like dogs. And the differences in the shapes of those dogs and so forth are going to have some difference in behavior. Now, that's going to be my theme. So all of a sudden you realize, Prescott's going to start to ease back in his chair or something like that, because when you realize that all those shapes are genetic, all right, you breed dachshunds to other dachshunds so that you get dachshunds. All right, and you can do anything you want. You could put leg stretchers on them when they're born, and so forth. You're not going to get anything else but a dachshund. All right, now, if you look at, say, all those faces on the dogs, and then they say, well, the dog has mostly large variation in the face, the length of the face, the width of the face, and so on. Most of it comes in the nasal bones. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to shoot you. Now, here's just a little montage of the different kinds of birds. So here you are, you're a bird trainer. And you're going to go and you're going to train a bird. You say, look, I want this bird to come up to my bird feeder and pick little tiny seeds out. And you as the bird trainer say, I can't do that. I can't do that at all. It is impossible. Now, and so I threw a bunch in here. Spoonbill, can't feed like a pelican, can't feed like a duck, can't feed like a hawk. And so it's going to be the same scene on the dogs. All right, so you go ahead and somebody comes down to you and wants you to train their dog. As I say, most of the time they come and they see you and they want you to train their dog not to do something that it's doing. But anyway, you can see the limitations of it. I have a former student who is now kind of a famous embryologist and works with faces. Embryologists are, for the most part, crazy. As a class of people, they border on the lunatic. And so they're always moving cells. So they go over here and they go into this animal and they take this cell and they put it out and they put it in the same place in the other animal and see what's happened. And my friend Snyder, he moves neural crest cells from one bird to another. So they move the duck cells over onto the quail. And guess what? The quail develops a duckbill, grows up, and it has a duckbill. The interesting part about having a duckbill for the quail is that it fits. All right, so you got genes for the bill, but you don't have genes for the way it fits on the face. All right, that's a different story. And so when we're looking at dogs, you're looking at places that we've selected to change those neural crest cells, and we can change the length of the face. We can change lots of things about the face, but as a matter of fact, they tend to fit. Now, that's kind of interesting because the fitting, how you fit that muzzle onto that head is not genetic, or is it genetic in the sense that there are gene pathways and there's cascades of effect that will adapt every bone to every other bone. So the bones in your skull, the bones on your face are all have this thing where they're called accommodation, where they always fit. So when you're growing up, you don't have one set of genes for your brain and another set of genes for your skull, because finally some of you would be up there and your brains would be too small and you'd get a bad gene in there somewhere and you'd have a brain that was too small, and when you moved, it would rattle in there. Or you've all seen people walking around saying, oh, my brain's too tight, just whatever. No, the brain is creating the skull. It just actually grows its own skull around it. So if the brain changes shape, then the skull changes its shape to accommodate to it. All right, that's why you can get away with all that foolishness with dogs. is because they have these genes that will accommodate that nose, that muzzle, and that head to those brains. You do get into trouble sometimes. And the King Charles Spaniel is one of those things where, you've finally taken them too far, and they can't manage it. All right, so realizing, that kind of variation, you've got to realize that now we've talked about a few superficial characteristics. We've talked about the dog's face, how it looks, and whatever else. But you've got to realize that when you go into every dog in the world, you're going to have other shape differences inside in the brain and in the rest of the body. And here is another of my students who looked at norepinephrine, and she looked at norepinephrine that are neurotransmitters. And she looked at border collies, and she looked at Shars, and she looked at Siberian Huskies, Anatolian sheepdogs, Maremas, and then crossbreeds. Now, what I want you to realize that right now is that if I'm trying to train a border collie, or if a border collie is out there and he's going to do something, he has to have a certain amount of neurotransmitters to get away with it. So here's the border collie up here in one area of the brain, and look at how much more norepinephrine it has than, say, the Anatolian shepherd in the middle. All right? So if I'm going to train one of these dogs, look at the Anatolian shepherd down here and compare it to the Siberian husky. Am I going to be able to train? Well, they can't, in that part of the brain, they can't even transfer the information from one part of the brain to the other. All right, because they don't have the hormone, they don't have the chemical. The other thing I wanted you to note about this is when we talk about breeds, most of your breeds are hybrids between other breeds. All right, so there's two ways to get a breed. One is to pick up on a mutation and then support that mutation. The other way is to hybridize. And so most of your dogs out there are hybrids between other kinds of dogs originally. So what happens to the brain? What happens to the shape when you hybridize it? And most of the literature out there says, well, you're going to cross a Labrador with a poodle, and you're going to get a Labradoodle or a doodle poodle or whatever. So what happens is my former student Cindy Ahrens did these experiments, and what she did was she crossed, for example, Border Collie with a Yugoslavian Sharplaninus. Sounds familiar, huh? What happens when you cross a Border Collie with a Sharplaninus? Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. Where was I? In this particular one here, in the hippocampus, the Border Collie times the Sharplaninus has a neurotransmitter that's less than both the parents. Follow that? I wish I could hold that steady, I've got to stop doing something. All right, if you look at, for example, the Border Collie times the husky, the Siberian husky, all right, the neurotransmitters are way above what the parent generation is. All right, so when you hybridize an animal, you don't necessarily get an average. You get something totally bizarre. All right, so most of you, and you know that, from most of your breeds, the dogs are totally bizarre. All right, now, we did this yesterday, and I just want a quick review. When we're going to study the breed differences in dogs, I'm down here. I'm a biologist, and I study working dogs. And the reason that they hired me to do all those wonderful studies is because I'm a behavioral ecologist. My PhD is in behavioral ecology. And so you go out there and you say, all right, I got to have a dog. I'm going to raise the dog in a particular environment, and I want him to perform in a particular way. So I get my Siberian Husky. I'm breeding it for size and everything. I'm breeding it for gait, and I know what the environment is that I'm going to raise that. I'm going to raise that dog in the snow, if you will. And the two breeds of dogs that I worked with a lot were the livestock guarding dogs and the livestock herding dogs, like a border collie. Now, it's an animal behaviorist's dream. They're dream animals because here are two different breeds of dogs, two different types of dogs, styles of dogs, that work in the same habitat and are focused on the same target animal, which is sheep or cattle or whatever. You know, so they work in the same environment, they're supposed to do different things. All right? And what are you going to train? A livestock guarding dog, let's see where I am. Are you going to train a livestock guarding dog to behave like a wolf or a border collie? All right, I lost my thought there. I got going on something else. Motor patterns. It's through an integrated sequence of movement that animals express rules. And yesterday, Simon talked about rules, I talked about rules and so forth. And so we're going to look at some of the rules, the breed difference rules today. And basically what's happened is if you look at your neurotransmitters, you look at your nephrine, you realize that all of a sudden those dogs are playing by different sets of rules, different chemical reactions. So Prescott showed you that wonderful movie with everything moving around. Well, the fact is that was for Chihuahuas, and it wasn't for St. Bernards. All right, it's just slightly different of what that movement is. All right. So anyway, here's an animal expressing a rule. These are wolves, and the interesting part about it is we had a long discussion yesterday. Does this animal know that it's taking that shape? Does he know that that shape is an advantage, a selective advantage? If he gets into that shape, then he'll select it for and leave more genes to the next generation? And I doubt it. But anyway, we'll come back to that. That'll create a storm out there. Where am I? All right. Now, here's another important point. And for those of you who are dog trainers, this is probably the most important point that you'll learn today. You all go on this kind of click and treat thing where you're going to give the dog a little, if he sits, you give him a reward. And actually the last conference I was at, Ken McCourt gave me a feed bag that I can hang over here, so a treat bag, and so on. The trouble with a treat bag when you're doing wolves is that they all of a sudden realize that the reward is in the bag and they come after you. All right, so the classic model was, and the ones that the comparative psychologists and so on use, is that you have some environmental signal out there, moose. All right, so you go through a whole series of motor patterns and you catch the moose and you eat it. So the reward is the moose. And I'm here to tell you that that's totally wrong. The reward is in performing the motor pattern. So you have a motivation, you have some kind of internal arousal that goes on in the animal. Now, that arousal might be a reaction to a certain kind of environment or whatever, but the arousal is actually the chemicals in the body that do it. And what happens at that point is that the aroused animal goes into a set of rules and performs the appropriate motor pattern. And performing the motor pattern is where you get the sense of pleasure or the reduction of the anxiety. All right, so the reward isn't catching the moose. The reward is doing eye stalk chase. And I think I do that. All right, so what I want to talk about today a little bit, and we want to talk about the hypothalamus, the dopamine system, and we're going to look at that in a little bit of detail. And then we're going to not look at the midbrain stem because those opium receptors we're not allowed to talk about. So the reason that when you take opium and so on that it feels so good is because you've got receptors in the brain, and it's not the right opiate, but it produces some interesting sensations. And they're pleasurable sensations. That's why you take drugs and dopes and stuff like that, is because it gives you, I'm told, it gives you a pleasurable sensation and so on. So anyway, when the animal performs the correct behavior, all right, it gets a release of hormones, of opiates and so forth, and he feels good. All right, so that sounds far off the wall. Just think about human sexual behavior. All right? Guess what happens? Do you do it for the reward, which is a baby 9 months from now? If you do, you're some kind of Puritan. I don't know what happened. But anyway, the fact is that you do it because it's pleasurable. I go up, I'm old enough now, I can go up to my students, and I'll be teaching a class, and there'll be a couple of students back there holding hands. So I always go up. I'm always a curious guy. I go up and say, "Why are you holding hands?" And they say, "We're in love." I said, "Okay, I'll accept the fact that you're in love, but why are you holding hands?" All right, then say, "Well, blah, 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 we met, and they're getting something." No, but why are you holding hands? And the bottom line as to why you're holding hands is because it feels good. All right, there's a pleasure. There's a anxiety there, and you can reduce the anxiety by holding hands. All right, so you turn out the lights, and they immediately go to face sucking. And then I forgot what comes after that. So anyway, the long and the short of it is, so remember my model here. It's a motivation, and it's neurotransmitters, and as appropriate, the animal takes on that shape like you saw in the last slide. He takes on that shape, and it reduces the anxiety. It gives him an opiate response and so forth, and it's pleasurable. And that's what I was trying to say yesterday in the discussion that we had here, was the fact is that you keep saying the animal is reduced to some kind of aggression or something like that, as if, believe it or not, there's some training process. But that animal is being aggressive because it feels good. That animal there is being submissive, or whatever you want to call it, because it feels good. You get into the right environment, you get that surge, anxiety and motivation, you go into the appropriate motor pattern, and it gives you a pleasurable reward. That is, animal isn't doing it because any other reason other than the fact it feels good. All right? So here's the system. And we were talking about it when we talked about consciousness and so on. Here's a wolf, and he's gone into I, all right, a motor pattern. He sees something out there, and he's going to go after it. So the first thing he does is he goes into I, and all of a sudden he gets this enormous release of pleasure for doing I. Sometimes that enormous release is the motivation for the next motor pattern. And so the animal will go through a sequence. In the cats, they're connected up. Dogs can get into the cycle in here. For example, that they can go right to kill, bite, or they can go right to dissect without going through the whole process. Lots of times the cats, the wild cats, the pumas and whatever, can't do that. They have to do the whole sequence. So they go, "Oh, do you think they know what they're doing?" Come on, if they have to do the whole sequence, and you interrupt the sequence down here somewhere, and so they have to go back and start again. Does it make any sense to you? No. And so do they know what they're doing? Probably not. All right, so you get the little pleasure, you get the anxiety and the pleasure, and you go through the whole thing. And just by going through the whole thing, you really feel good. It's like you runners out there. You go and run, and you get this endorphin release. And, and you say a runner's high or whatever else. And guess what? There's no reward at the other end. Zero reward. The reward was in doing the activity. All right. Now, what you find in dogs, and what we're going to look at pretty soon in dogs, is some of them don't have certain motor patterns. They have some motor patterns and not other motor patterns, and so on. So if you went in, and again, this is Cindy Ahrens, who got her PhD doing this kind of stuff. All right, so here I am. I'm going to go to the amygdala, and the amygdala is one of those areas of the brain where, it's an activity area. And so you look at, the border collie over there, and it's got the most dopamine in the system. So it's very easy to arouse them, And by the way, you should advise all your clients not to get border collies as pets. They're really a pain. And so anyway, so you can arouse the border collie, but down here you can't arouse the Anatolian Shepherd at all in that. You can't teach him that. If that's chasing a ball, all right, if that's the motor pattern that's going to go on and chase, it's going to be easy to get a border collie in there, and it's going to be impossible to get the Anatolian or the Shar in there. So, and that's the selective difference. If you're out there and you're into working dogs, I don't want chase in my Anatolians, in my Shars, in my Maremas, all right? But I definitely want chase in a border collie, all right? So I select the dogs that have the neurotransmitters that will lead to the kind of anxiety where they'll do this and fall into the right motor pattern. So you could go through all these different areas of the brain. Look at that, dopamine in the putamen, none, very low down here. Look at how the hybrids out here are, bizarre. They're not representative of their parent generation and so on. What more do you need to know about that? You're out there and somebody comes in there and says, I want to take my Anatolian Shepherd and I want to teach it to herd sheep. And you just look at them and say, look, the Anatolian Shepherds don't have very much dopamine in the anterior hypothalamus, and it's probably going to be pretty hard to change it to herd sheep. Okay? I wouldn't have to say anything more about breed differences. So if you got your show dogs out there and you're breeding them to stand still and not bounce around and so on, look nice before the judge, what you're doing is you're breeding, all these little systems in the brain to react in one way or another. And you're not going to just take them out and do something else with them, and so on, teach them to herd sheep, for example. All right, so this is what they called yesterday when Simon was talking. He talked about, I think it was Patricia. I think it was Patricia talking about ethograms. And so if you're one of my students, what you do is ethograms. All right, so here's the wild type. Here's a coyote or something. It has an orientation. It has connected eye, stalk, chase, grab, bite, kill, bite. If I look at my livestock guarding dogs, they're not supposed to have the orientation move. They're not supposed to have eye. They're not supposed to have stalk. They're not supposed to have chase. They're not supposed to have grab bite or kill bite. All right, that's just it. If I go into a kennel, I did this a little while ago in South Africa where there were a bunch of breeders and they were selling Anatolian Shepherds as livestock guarding dogs. Oh yeah, look at your dog. I have my little ball. I throw the ball. The dogs chase the ball. I say, see you later. Goodbye. You don't have the dogs that I want. And you could go through this in any number of details. The heading dogs, which like the border collie, all right, they have a hypertrophied orientation, eye, stalk. Border Collies do eye stalk better than any other animal in the world. You know, they're better than wolves or anything else. They do the eye stalk chase. They're not supposed to have the grab bite, and they're not supposed to have the kill bite. Those are faults, all right? So all the way across the top there with the livestock guarding dogs, if they have any of those motor patterns, that's a fault, and they're disqualified, all right? So if you take a heading dog and eye stalk chase, if they have the grab bite or the kill bite, that's a fault, and they're disqualified. Right then and there, they're disqualified. All right, now you can go through, I don't know if we want to go through this, healers, like the Queensland Blue Healer. I said that for our Australian guests. The Queensland Blue Healer, they have the Orient, they have a very weak eye stalk. They have the chase, they have to have the grab bite. But they're not supposed to have the kill bite. Just do the retrievers down here. All right, so I'm going to show you some pictures of Chesapeake Bay retrievers. And so, the retriever has the orientation. They are supposed to have a weak eye stalk, although some breeders now are trying to get them to get more eye stalk. They have a weak chase. I don't want chasing my pointer, right? Every year I get all the magazines, and every year in my Pointer magazine is a article on how to steady your dog. And what steady your dog means is how to get him not to chase the bird. All right, so he jumps in there, and the bird flies off, and the dog chases the bird. How do you steady your dog? And if you read Charles Lamprey, he'll say, well, you should try this, and you should try that, or get another dog. Because if he has the chase motor pattern, you know, what you're trying to do is you're trying to inhibit the animal from doing something that's pleasurable. And it doesn't work. All right, so on the retrievers, you have an orientation, you have a weak eye stalk chase, you have to have a hypertrophic grab bite and not a kill bite. Well, if you have the kill bite, the retriever has the kill bite, you know, I clamped down on the bird. I saw one day, and the guts spurted out of the mouth and the back end. You know, the dog came in with all this hanging garbage. And they call that hard mouth. So if you read the retriever magazines, you know, how do you cure your dog of a hard mouth? Well, you try this, you try that, you get another dog. All right? And so I'm very serious, is that when you're into working dogs or sporting dogs or whatever else, the whole name of the game, it's true now and it was always true, is it's sorting and culling. All right, you got to go through them. When I was the champion sled dog racer, I hate to brag, when I was a champion sled dog racer, it took me 15 years. It took me the first 10 to figure out what I was doing. And the last 5, I was a pretty good racer. But the long and the short was that 4,000 dogs went through the yard. All right, 4,000 dogs went through the yard. Some of them didn't stay in the yard very long. But you're looking for a dog that has a particular gait that will run that position right there. The dog just ahead of the wheel dog on the right side has to be right-handed and has to be this and has to be that. And you sort through dogs to find a dog that can run that position. You sort through the dogs to find wheel dogs are such important dogs. They're the dogs that take all the punishment. They have to be the same size as all the rest of the dogs on the team. But they have to have a slight difference in temperament and so on to take that pounding where they're right ahead of the sled. And so you're sorting through dogs, and you're getting dogs for this position and that position, another position, and what are you going to do, breed for it? You're not going to breed for a dog in front of the wheel dog? No, I go and I look for it. All right, and I sort through all the dogs in the world to find out which is which. Clear enough? All right, now, here we got a bunch of retrievers, got a pointer, and here's this dog coming in, and he's got a goose in his mouth. Here's a dog. This is my son, and this is one of his dogs, and the dog comes in with a bumper in its mouth. Why the hell would the dog do that? You know, here comes a dog in with a bird in his mouth. Now, what's the problem? There's no real problem most of the time. The dog comes in, you say, give, and the dog won't give you the bird. Give me the bird, or it won't give me the bumper. All right, and so you're trying to train the dog just to give it up. And the answer is, why? Why won't they give it to you? And the answer is, because it feels really, really good biting it. All right, they're coming in there, and that dog there, you know, if you went in and you look at its eyes would be dilated, you know, it would look great. And so the whole trick on why you'd have a Labrador on geese, you know, and this dog on pigeons and so on, is just a matter of size. They're both doing the same thing. You teach them what they're supposed to grab bite, you know, and here it was, my son would use bumpers all the time, and then we'd go to a trial, and the dog would have to pick up a pigeon. And I can remember dogs going out there and looking, oh, what the hell is that? But anyway, the reason that they're doing that, the reason that dog is doing that, is because it feels good. There was a motivation. The dog went into chase. It went out there, did the grab bite, and it feels wonderful. Now, how do I know that? Because, as a matter of fact, sometimes it goes wrong. And so here was one of our Chesapeake Bays. And what you had to do is that during porcupine season, which is all summer long, you have to manage the dog so the dog doesn't get in there. Every time you let that dog go out, it would run out in the backyard and it would grab bite a porcupine. All right? And you'd say, well, isn't it, it's not being rewarded for grab biting. Oh, it is, because the motivation is internal. I'm sorry, I keep looking down here and not at you guys up back there. Can't see you. The long and the short of it is, when you're fighting pit bulls, is that what you're selecting in the pit bulls, which is the same thing you selected for in the old bull baiting dogs, are what they call the grocer's dog, I forgot the word. But anyway, what you're selecting for is a hypertrophied grab bite. A hypertrophied grab bite. So the dog would go and it would latch onto the bull's nose and it would just hang on. It would just hang on. It wouldn't let go. Why wouldn't it let go? The bull would be battering it around and battering it up against things and so on, and it won't let go. Why? Because it feels good. All right? And so take it back to human sexual behavior. Realize how hard it is to talk somebody out of something. Patricia talked about how to talk somebody into it. Actually, the two guys, you were trying to talk out of it, I guess. But anyway, the long and the short of it, they have a hypertrophy grab bite, and they're terrible when you get around porcupines. They go in there and they grab that porcupine, and it doesn't matter how much the porcupine beats it and hurts it and everything else. The pleasure of doing the behavior is much more than the pain that comes with it. And I could give you 1,000 illustrations where, you get two guys in a ring and they beat each other with their gloves and so on. Why do they do it? They feel good. Let's see where I'm going to go from here. All right, so what you're doing with the hunting dogs is you're selecting for various kinds of dopamine systems. How aroused is the animal? If the dog is a really high arousal dog, and so on, it will range out there far. If indeed you cut back on those systems and so forth, the dog will stay closer to you. So you have these animals called walking hounds that stay with you and walk with you until you finally cross a trail, and then they get on it and they go off. Again, the hard mouth, or here's a dog that stopped and ate the bird, that's a fault. All right, that was one of my dogs. Nice dog. All right, you're beginning to get the idea what breed differences are all about. All right, and I love to hunt. I go hunting with dogs. I love to watch dogs run. whether that was what it was doing, I get this pleasure. I have this dopamine receptor right here that runs me out there and runs on these hunts. And so I actually own some hunts in East Africa, you know, these genet hounds. They're all mine. I have more dogs than probably everybody here in the group put together. The difference between me and you is I don't bring them home. All right, so I got these dogs out there in Africa, and they're doing what they're supposed to do. All right, and so they're genet hounds or whatever, beautiful dogs. I love to go there and watch them run. This is Plummer. Forgot what his first name is. He was a famous dog guy, written lots of books on training dogs, especially bird dogs or hounds and whatever else. And here he is, and he's hunting. These are King Charles Spaniels. And he's hunting them over a ferret. All right, so he's got the ferret going down and bringing the rabbits out. And what they have to do, the dog has to go and listen and hear where the rabbit's coming out so that it gets it. So, you know, you'll see dogs sitting there looking into holes or something, you know, a big area. All right, and here's a good old rabbit hunter. All right, so now we want to measure. We're animal behaviorists and we're ethologists, and we want to look at the quality. We want to look at the shape of the behavior. And there's the shape of a coyote. And yesterday I showed you a wolf doing the same behavior, and so on. And it's called a 4-foot stab. Many of us call it a mouse jump. There's certain breeds of dogs will do it and not, which leads us all to think that it's motor patterns. It's listed in the ethogram of the motor patterns of the coyotes and the wolf and so on. Do you think that the animal knows that it's forming that shape? Do you think the animal knows that it is going to be able to leave more offspring to the next generation for performing the motor pattern? Why do wolves and coyotes and dingoes and jackals do this behavior? It's because it's genetic. They inherit it. And I can prove it to you in lots of different ways because I can select dogs that won't do it. All right, the frequency, the number of times, and Catherine talked about this yesterday, you know, how many times does the animal actually do it? In what sequences does the animal actually perform the individual motor patterns? All right, so as she told you yesterday on the dogs bark at a higher frequency than wolves and coyotes. And that's, you know, is it a genetic difference? Is it an environmental difference? Is it a little both? What's going on? So I don't want to go there. All right. And again, as I told you yesterday, you can put all behaviors. If you're looking at selective advantage, what's the advantage for doing it? It has to be in 3 groups, and only 3 groups. As somebody put a 4 in yesterday, and I forgot what it was. But play? Oh my goodness. Let me just run back here. I'll do this for Lindsay. What happens is that when you watch the little retriever coming in here with, you know, and it does the orient, it does the grab bite, and it comes in and hold. It's not a functional sequence, right? From an evolutionary point of view, it's not a functional sequence. So you say, and I've heard you say it, you go out and say, I'm going to play with my dog. Right? And it's really much harder to go out and play with a wolf because they have the complete sequence and you get them started on something and they're going to eat it. All right, but I go out there and I throw the ball for my retriever. Our retrievers love that feeling of a ball in their mouth so much that you couldn't ever do anything like read a newspaper. All right, so I go and sit in the read my newspaper, and the dog comes and drops some slimy ball in my lap. And so I finally figured out how to read the newspaper, which is hide the ball. and then get the newspaper and say to the dog, "Get your ball." And the dog would look all over, spend an hour looking for the ball, and you give you a chance to read the newspaper. By the way, the best place to hide the ball is in the refrigerator. How many times I've heard Lorna say, "Who put this slimy ball in the refrigerator?" The dog could never find it in the refrigerator. But anyway, from the point of view of play, it's a non-functional behavior, which is what play is classified at. And somebody says, okay, we said yesterday, animals play more as puppies or as juveniles than they do as adults. They say, and then somebody says, how come dogs still play as adults? And the answer is they don't have a complete functional sequence. So it doesn't go to some end. How am I doing on time? All right, I think we got through here, right? We got foraging motor patterns, reproductive motor patterns, and hazard avoidance. So I just wanted you to take, am I doing all right in time? What does that mean? You're good. I'm good. All right, livestock guarding dogs. Now, in my livestock guarding dogs, I had hundreds of them, thousands. And I think we ended up with 1,500 dogs in that particular experiment. And they all varied a little bit in their behavior. And so one of the things that we had to do in our studies of them is see how they varied, what they vary of. So we had trustworthy dogs, and trustworthy dogs were attentive to the sheep. They would go out there and they would stay with the sheep, and they would protect the sheep from predators coming in. And I can talk more about that. But the fact is that they're not supposed to chase sheep. They're not supposed to herd them. They're not supposed to do all that other kinds of behavior. All right, so here's a dog. I turned a border collie loose on sheep. The dog goes and does the eye stalk in the sheep. The livestock guarding dog comes along. It's not oriented to the sheep. That's what's important here. It's not oriented to the sheep. It's oriented to the other dog. All right, that's what you're selecting for. All right, so then I get untrustworthy livestock guarding dogs. And untrustworthy livestock guarding dogs are dogs that chase sheep, like this one down here. Oh, sorry. He chases sheep, he'll run the sheep around, he just chase and chase and chase. The sheep either die of exhaustion, or he'll run them into a fence or something and they'll break their necks or whatever else. But the dog has chase. All right, here's an untrustworthy livestock guarding dog. Look at it, he's got the orientation move. There, all of a sudden, he goes up and he does the move on a sheep, and the sheep doesn't move, and he goes into this conflict behavior. Now, a lot of you are going to call that a play bow, but as a matter of fact, right after that is signaling the bloody sheep that it's going to play, and it killed it. All right, the same thing here. You look at the orientation move and so forth. It's not exactly like a border collie because the head is too high and so on, but the sheep certainly recognizes what's going on. All right, so when you look at the scores, this was 900 dogs in this experiment, and they Anatolian Shepherds, Anatolian Shire crosses, Sharplinianus, Maremma's type Shire, and that was my best dog. That crossbreed right there made me. I had so many dogs in Texas which were Maremma and Shire crosses that one guy says, you're so famous down here, you could run for governor. And that was just before George Bush became governor. And if I had run for governor, the whole world would be a different place. So anyway, and so what we're looking at is trustworthy behavior, attentive behavior, and protective behavior. So you see, for example, I can get dogs that are very attentive. There's my Shires, and they're attentive. But they're not as, they're trustworthy. You can put them anywhere, and they're trustworthy. 85% of them are trustworthy. But they're not very attentive. All right. Why is that? I don't know. So they're not very protective. If they're not there, they can't protect the sheep. All right, so anyway, you look at the Anatolians, and they were, so everybody's just about, there's no statistical differences in any of these columns. I hate to say that with Simon around here. But anyway, the long and the short of it is there's variation. What that means is that if I'm looking at trustworthy there's 30% of those dogs that are untrustworthy. All right, there's more than 30% there. All right, so you get the idea. All right, we're going to go out there and we're going to study the dogs. And now the other dog here is a herding dog, which I used almost exclusively border collies. I'd go to Scotland, I'd buy the dogs I wanted, and I'd bring them home, and I'd run the same kind of tests on them that I would run on the livestock guarding dogs. All right, now, one thing I wanted to point out to you is that it's characteristic of a border collie to drop its mouth open as it comes up on the sheep. You see that? You see that? Don't look at this one. And it's a characteristic of them to drop the mouth open. And when you're thinking dogs and you're thinking dog behavior and you're thinking social relationship between the dogs, think nose, all right? Or think, you see those two openings right there through the roof of the mouth? There's a sense organ right in there between their teeth, and it's, above it is an organ. And in a good-sized dog, it's the size of my thumb, my little finger. It sits right on top of the palate, and it's highly vascularized, and it's highly innervated. You know, you're not going to have an organ sitting around highly vascularized and highly innervated if it's not doing something. All right, and so what they do is that, by the way, all mammals have it except for humans, and I think the primates, but it's an old organ. It goes all the way back to the snakes. The snake has a forked tongue. He spits the tongue out and he brings it back and he sticks it up into those two little holes in the roof of his mouth, and he gets some sense out of it. And so yesterday somebody was showing us this wolf lick, right? Didn't we see that yesterday? No, a wolf does this. What's he doing? He's picking up molecules out there and he's bringing them in and he's putting them on the vomeronasal, the receptors there, and so on. It goes in and it does something. You've all seen horses do that. They do the Fleming thing, and people think it's mostly when there's a mare in heat or something like that, so that they're getting sexual pheromones in there too. But for most mammals, that's probably the more important organ. The nose is, and a dog is for almost something completely different, which I don't have time to go into. Anyway, so we look at the border collies. So let's compare them. And we're going to look at herding dogs, like the border collie. And we're going to look at untrustworthy livestock guarding dogs. And we want to do the trustworthy livestock guarding dogs. And we want to do them in a kind of the same environment. So one of my students, John Glendenning, set up this experiment where we had chickens, we had roosters. All right, so you take a rooster, and I take a normal rooster, and then you take a rooster that's sedated. So drugged, they just stand there. The dog comes up, and they just stand there, and they don't do anything. All right, so you say, all right, if you have an active, by the way, that's trustworthy livestock guarding dog, that's untrustworthy livestock guarding dog, and that's herding dog, border collie. All right, so you look at an active rooster, and you look at the number of approaches a trustworthy livestock guarding dog does. Yeah, it's 16%. 16 is the number, as opposed to 85 times the approach. So the untrustworthy livestock guarding dog is much more active, much more interested. All right, so what do they do next? All right, well, you have a series of behaviors you're looking for. Watch this, Lindsay. You got the trustworthy livestock guarding dog. 18% of the time after that approach, they end up in some kind of little play sequence. Non-functional behavior. All right, if you look at the untrustworthy livestock, 50% of them end up playing with a rooster. All right. The border collies 83% of the time it ends up in a predatory motor pattern. If you look at the sedated rooster sitting there, all right, the number of approaches of the trustworthy dog is about the same. All right, but look at on the untrustworthy dog, the number of approaches go way down. All right, and there is no play in any of that. They all come out there and they do this kind of investigation of the rooster. So here they are up here. With a border collie, okay, the 76 approaches, about the same between the active and the sedative rooster. And all of a sudden, the predatory motor patterns drop from 83 to 54. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, so the border collies were great. They'd come out there, and the rooster's drugged, and they'd crawl up on the rooster, you know, and they'd look at the rooster, and the rooster just stand there. And the dog would go into these, what we call a conflict behavior. It would bounce around. It would bark at the rooster. If the rooster blinked, it would go back into eye stalk. All right, if the rooster didn't blink at something, I've actually seen them do play bows before the rooster. They go around, they do all this kind of stuff. All right, so that's how you would have to do it. Now, if I was like James and was going to do all the dogs in the world, this is the way I'd do it. All right, controlled experiment where you got a managed environment, you're looking at specific differences. All right, last little bit. Breed-specific behavior, or breed-typical behavior. I believe that behavior is a taxonomic character of the animal. It's genetic, it's built in, and so here you are. You got a border collie. It's a kind of a lousy eye stalk, but believe it or not, it works pretty good. And so here we go. Behavior is a taxonomic characteristic. And so here comes my border collie. And its mouth is open and it's coming up. The sheep are beginning to move away. Now, right there is a threshold. All right, on one side of the threshold is eye stalk. When it crosses the threshold, go into chase. Now, that's a very important point because we say the dog does eye stalk, chase, bite, grab, bite, kill, bite, whatever. And it goes right into this stuff. So where does the point come between going into eye stalk and chase? And it's called a threshold. The border collie people call it the balance point. And so what that point is genetic. Right? A guy comes up and says to me, look, I got a really nice border collie. I'd like to sell him to you. He's beautifully trained and everything else. And I say, all right, go ahead, let's see him work. So he puts the dog out there, and the dog is gorgeous. It does all the right things at all the right times, and and everything. And the guy says, what do you think? I said, Jesus, that's a really, really nice dog, but I can't use it. I'm not that good of a handler. All right, I need a bigger threshold or balance point. All right. Most of the time, what I'm doing is I'm working sheep on a range, and they're way the hell out there, somewhere. And when I want them to go into chase, there's a different point than when I want a trial dog to go into chase. And you can select for that. And border collie people talk about that. They go in there and they say, oh, well, that's like, he has a balance point like my old Nell dog. It was too quick, or it was too whatever. And so there's variation in where that threshold point is. But it's there, and you can breed for it. Oh, I get so excited. All right, so now here's a guy, and he's let the dog come over the threshold point, and he's lost control. And the dog is just in a dead run, chase the sheep. Now, the way you do that, the way you actually do the performance is that I know where the threshold points are in my dog. So here comes my dog up here towards the threshold point. If the sheep aren't moving right or whatever, I say to the dog, get down. There's only about 4 things you have to teach a dog, border collie. Get up, get down, go left, go right. All right, so, and that's easy enough. Everybody says they're the most intelligent dog. They're impossible dogs. The dumbest things I ever saw. But anyway, the long and the short of it, so I bring the dog up and get down. All right, the sheep move off a little bit. My threshold point moves with him. All right, get up, come up, come up, come up. So the dog comes in and get down. All right, that's the way you're doing it. Run left, run right, wait a me, come by. All right, so I do that. But this guy the dog's come over the threshold line, and he's in an all-out chase, and he's lost control of it. The only thing he can do, if he could get the dog to sit down, get down. God damn you, get down. Anyway, the long and the short of it is that on this particular dog, he not only got over the threshold for chase, grab bite, he went right to the kill bite. He got right in there and he went right to the kill bite. Now, this dog has never killed a sheep, and he didn't kill this one. All right. How did the dog do that? How did it know how to go and do that? I think I might even have a picture of a coyote. Yeah, I do. All right. How the hell do they know that do that that's the place to go? And the answer is it's genetic. It's built in. It has to do with all that balance between the dopamine and the opiates and everything else in the particular brain. You can select for it, or you can select against it. Now, most border collie trial people like the dog to have a little grab bite or maybe a kill bite. And the only reason the dogs don't get disqualified is you've got them under control. Get down. And the judge never sees the fact that they have grab bite or kill bite. All right. In this particular case, the guy's lost control and the dog's gone into a kill bite performance. And I just wanted you to see that, you realize that that's beautiful. That's a nice behavior. That's a motor pattern that nobody taught the dog to do that. Does the dog know what he's doing? All right, so let's see. That makes my point. Behavior is a taxonomic characteristic of a species or the breed, and that when you see two species doing the same thing, you call that homologous behaviors. And the assumption somewhere down the line is that they're genetic and they inherited it from the same ancestor. I think that's it. I hope so. I'm going to talk. So I got to go.